Ever since Metaphor ReFantazio was revealed way back in what I believe was June of 2023 last year, this had become one of my most anticipated games to release. To absolutely no surprise, this game comes from a lot of the developers who worked on the very popular Persona series. From what I understand, they would branch off to create a new studio named Studio Zero to create this brand new IP. And now, actually getting the chance to play the demo, I have to say that the anticipation I had for this game still holds. The way I describe this game is that it's really a fantasy style Persona with its own identity. Some familiar mechanics and systems that you see from Persona are mirrored in Metaphor ReFantazio. But even though they take a lot of those systems that worked in those previous games, they also make sure to iterate on them in a way that feels fresh and new to the player. I can definitely see a lot of stuff that Metaphor is doing and at least using this game to experiment for Persona 6. And after the 5 hours it took to complete this demo, I think it's even more apparent now that Metaphor ReFantazio may become one of the best games of the year. So if you haven't already, do not forget to like the video and subscribe if you want to keep up to date with anything Metaphor or JRPG related in the future. So I was expecting to enjoy my time with Metaphor ReFantazio, but I wasn't expecting to love my time with it. As someone who adores the fantasy aesthetic and setting, especially in JRPGs, I had already had my eye on this game from the very beginning, especially knowing that Katsura Hashino, who directed Persona 3 through 5, was also directing this title as well. Right from the jump, I was completely blown away from the presentation of this game. The art style is still one of their biggest strong suits, and part of me was a little worried that since they were going for a more traditional fantasy here, that the art style and UI design from similar games would lose its charm and feel a little watered down. But I didn't get that here. In fact, I'd say this is some of Atlus's best when it comes to art direction in my personal opinion. And unlike the Persona games, Metaphor ReFantazio wants to take its story a lot more serious and mature in its tone. And I gotta say, I find this approach to be a breath of fresh air. It's not that I don't enjoy what the Persona games have done, but they do start to feel pretty formulaic when you look at Persona 3 through 5. All of them sort of follow that same structure in game design, especially when it comes to how the story progresses. While Metaphor does take many aspects that worked in Persona, I think the story structure and writing feels a lot more tight and focused as opposed to just having that villain of the week structure that you see a lot in Persona. I think the introduction to this game really sets up its characters and main villain especially perfectly, and right from the beginning it establishes its tone, as you see the antagonists of the story assassinate the king of the royal capital. And just like that, automatically you understand what type of story this is going to be. Just a heads up, there will be some story spoilers for the demo, so if you have not played it yet, feel free to skip ahead. The world of Metaphor ReFantazio is divided by strict social classes with prejudice towards certain tribes of people that is seen as the social norm. This is a world where their fantasy is actually our way of life, where people can be free to pursue their own path, unbound by that prejudice and preconceived notions. You play as the hero who's on a quest to save his friend from a curse that has bedridden him into a deep slumber. This friend just so happens to be the prince of the royal capital of Grand Trad, where previously the antagonist Luis had assassinated the prince's father, the king, and to no surprise, all that he can have that throne for himself. I mean, classic villain stuff. It's also worth mentioning that Luis is also the one who placed that curse on the prince. So if you didn't already know, this Griffith looking guy is pretty bad, and us as a player must bring down Luis and stop him from gaining that throne. One thing leads to another and an election takes place in the capital. An election where any individual of any social status can become king. And this is where the true story of Metaphor ReFantazio begins. It'll be up to us to gain the trust and the support of the people and to put a stop to Luis and his ambitions. And in turn, saving the prince from his curse. All in all, really awesome stuff that I think has the potential to be a masterpiece of a story, as the first handful of hours of this game really set up the world and story very well. I have to say that the characters in this game are already so compelling. Of course, you have the main character who, unlike the Persona games, actually has voice lines.
Yeah, I'm awake.
Sorry to bug you. Look, I just have a lot on my mind. Can't seem to fall asleep. I'd heard about what it was like in the capital, but still. When you hear and see all this prejudice out in the open, it's a lot. You okay?
That's just how it is.
Well, I don't think that should be how it is.
And I like this because it gives your main character just that much more personality. And it makes them feel like they're a part of the world instead of being the silent protagonist who is more of a vessel to carry the story along and just nods to people when they want an answer. The other characters you'll meet are Gallica, our trusty fairy friend to guide us along this journey. A young noble named Stroll who takes an interest in our main character and becomes very close comrades. And fun fact, if you played through the demo and didn't recognize his voice, the actor is actually the same person who plays Dion in Final Fantasy XVI. Shout out to Stuart Clark because his performance here is already really good.
My name is Leon Stroll de Haliatus. My home and my family were taken from me. I am the last of my house. I am the last of my noble bloodline. And in the name of my people, I will strike you down where you stand!
And currently, I think he's probably one of my favorite characters in the game. I also really enjoyed Grius' character as well. He's one of the royal knights assigned to the protection of the prince and will stop at nothing to see him ascend the throne. And then we have another awesome character named Hulkenberg, who, like Grius, was also a former royal knight assigned to the protection of the prince. However, the tragedies that they experience will lead them to join our cause. And these were just the characters introduced in the demo. And considering the scale of these games, I'm sure we'll see a lot more. But already the entire cast feels extremely strong for these small 5 hours that you spend with them. I just hope that throughout the rest of the runtime for this very long game that the pacing is just right so that each character that gets introduced can have their moments to develop and maintain the level of complexity we see a lot with the characters already. With how long these games can be, they like to introduce a lot of characters even way later into the game, and they can sometimes end up not getting enough time to develop as well as others in the story. But if they can keep up the level of quality we see in this demo, I don't think we'll have much of a problem. I did notice that Metaphor ReFantazio adopts a lot of familiar mechanics from the Persona series. Just think of a lot of things you're familiar with in Persona and put them into Metaphor. With its very own confidant system where you can forge bonds to get new abilities, this game's very own version of personas named archetypes, and even a version of Igor named Moore. And I'm not gonna lie, a lot of the characters in this game, including this guy, really gives off JoJo vibes. That said, a lot of these mechanics are enhanced to make it feel fresh yet familiar to what we've already experienced. I will say though that some of the things in this game, like getting transported to another room to talk to this mysterious individual, does feel like it's too on the nose, like it's clearly just Persona tropes put into Metaphor. But like I said, this really does feel like an experiment by Atlus for when Persona 6 eventually does release in the next year or so. I think one of the coolest additions to combat is the fact that you actually don't have to fight enemies in turn-based. I did go into this in my other Metaphor video, but if the enemies are weaker to your level, the combat is designed in a way to where you can fight in real time and dispatch your enemies really quick so you don't have to go through the process of attacking an enemy, then going into the turn-based section just to get minuscule amounts of XP. You can just attack them in real time and simply move on, which really is a great way to save a lot of time in dungeons. It's always ideas like that and how they choose to iterate on combat systems that are already great and just making them that much better. I think now more than ever, a lot of turn-based style games are really getting creative in how they're choosing to push this style of gameplay to the next level. But overall, so far, I absolutely love this demo. I mean, you're getting 5 hours of gameplay and story that I think is a perfect representation of what the game is, and what you can expect going forward as you play the game. Again, while you can say it does feel like a fantasy Persona, and the DNA is certainly there, I think just going off of the demo, Metaphor already has its own identity with a little bit of nuance and iteration to the Persona formula that already works very well. There are some negatives, like the level design isn't exactly great so far. It can be very linear with not much variation in between that. So I hope that as the game goes along, the dungeons feel a bit more varied in the way that you approach them, and not just feel like you're walking forward with a couple paths here and there that lead to a chest or items. It really gives off those classic NES JRPG vibes where the dungeons were extremely linear with chests here and there. But other than that, all you really had to do to get to your destination was walk forward. I do hope that it's a little more creative than that, but we'll have to see. And while I do like the artistic style of the UI, it can get a bit overbearing in gameplay. When you're walking around or even just in battle, it can be a bit hard to see the fonts at times because the colors can visually be a bit too much. That said, I am happy to say that Atlus probably has another banger on their hands this year, with Yakuza Infinite Wealth and Persona 3 Reload with the DLC that just released this month. 2024 just seems like the year of Atlus. So if you got the chance to play the Metaphor ReFantazio demo, tell me what you think down below. Tell me what you liked about it, and if there was anything that you were disappointed by, be sure to discuss that down below as well. I know that for me personally, I am all in for Metaphor ReFantazio when it eventually releases on October 11th.